absolute value function. And we will do a lot more with this absolute value function in both sections 2.7 and 2.8. But for now, we're basically just plotting the absolute value stuff that we learned about in 2.4 and then did some more with, in 1.4 and then did some more with in 1.6. All right, so our function looks like this. F of x equals the absolute value of x. And we know how absolute value works. If you plug in a positive number, it comes out positive. If you plug in a negative number, it still comes out positive. Okay, so it's going to look like this. Let's make a table. X, Y. So here's a great number of values to use. If you go -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. So you guys are going to be making some tables in this section. These are the x values that I want you to plot. So -2, if we plug -2 into this function, absolute value of -2 is 2. Now plug in -1. Absolute value of -1 is 1. Now plug in 0. We're just plugging them all into this function, finding the y value. Absolute value of 0 is 0 because it's not any distance away from itself on the number line. Then 1, absolute value of 1 is 1 unit from 0. And 2 is 2 units from 0. So we're going to take those 5 points, we're going to plot them. I'm going to show you what this graph looks like. Okay, so start with the point -2, +2. So -2, +2 is right there. Next, the point -1, +1. So from the origin, -1, +1. Then the point 0, 0, right at the origin. Then 1, 1, so over 1, up 1. And 2, 2, so over 2, up 2. So these are the 5 points. And so when you connect the dots and keep the graph going out to both sides, you'll notice that it just has this V shape. So it's like this part of it looks like a normal line. And then when you get over here, that line flips because it gets flipped above the x-axis where everything is positive. Okay, so that's what your absolute value graph looks like. It looks like a V. The normal one is centered right at the origin, but we're going to do some examples here where we make some changes to it. So the way that you guys will be graphing these in your homework is just by plugging in to this table that I gave you right here. All right, so an XY table, just use those 5 values, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and you just take those 5 values and sub them in for x into this equation. Okay, so absolute value of -2 minus 2. All right, so -2 minus 2 is -4. -4 is 4 units away from 0. Okay, so I plugged in -1 for x. -1 minus 2 is -3, which is 3 units away from 0. Now plug 0 into that absolute value. 0 minus 2 is -2, which is 2 units away from 0. Now plug in 1. 1 minus 2 is -1, which is 1 unit away from 0. And plug this in. 2 minus 2 is 0. Okay, so let's plot what we've got here. Okay, so we have the point -2, 4, which is right here. -1, 3. -1 up to 3. 0, 2 would be right on the y-axis. 1, 1 is right here. And the point 2, 0 is on the x-axis. So now this doesn't look like our V shape yet. So let me show you what would happen if we plugged in just one more value. So we plugged in a 3. 3 minus 2 is 1, which is 1 unit away from 0, and that's when the graph turns around. So now we can plot like this. There's the left side of the V, and the right side is just going to keep going up. If I plugged in 4, 4 minus 2 has an absolute value of 2, so it's just going to keep going up from here. So this looks the same as this. It's just like I picked it up and moved it over here. All right, one last one. We're going to make the exact same table, just plug that in. Okay, so take those 5 x values and just take turns plugging them into the equation. Okay, so remember with absolute value, I can't distribute that negative. I take the absolute value, then I make it negative. So -2 is 2 units away. Make it negative. So -2 plus 1, which is negative 1. So I'm going to start plotting as I go. So negative 2, negative 1 is my first point. Then plug in negative 1, negative absolute value of negative 1, plus 1. So this is 1, which means the whole thing is negative 1, and then plus 1 gives me 0. So negative 1, I'm right on the x-axis here. Now plug in 0. Negative absolute value of 0, that's just 0. Plus 1 gives me 1. So I'm right here on the y-axis. Plug in 1, negative absolute value of 1, plus 1. So this is negative 1, plus 1 gives me 0. So 1, I'm right back on the x-axis here. And my last one, 2. Negative absolute value of 2. Absolute value is just 2, so the negative absolute value is negative 2. So negative 2 plus 1 is a negative 1. So that is my last point on the graph there. So you can see the V shape. Notice that the V shape is upside down. We'll talk about why exactly that happened in the next section. Notice it's also 1 unit up. Our original graph started at the origin. All right, so that is your absolute value and step function stuff.